And we're live. We're already talking about the Galaxy S9. We've got rumors on the horizon, and maybe we'll see an S9 Mini next year. I don't know. Fingers crossed. Sprint chooses Hulu to fight T-Mobile and Netflix. And plus, we've got a lot to talk about when it comes to the OnePlus 5T. Our buddy Ryan, a.k.a. Fried Face, drops by the podcast to chew through all the news that's fit to print. We've got a lot to talk about, so make sure you're charged and ready for episode 279. Of the Pocketnow Weekly, recorded November 17th at noon Pacific. This weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile, smartphones, tablets, and wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid, and OnePlus 5T was just a silly, easy algebra problem. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, senior editor at Pocketnow.com, joined as always by plucky podcast producer and in one window, our buddy Ryan joining the show. Welcome to both of you out on the East Coast.
Oh, so he has assumed I'm role, I guess. I think I've been fired from Pocketnow.
Oh. I'm so
sorry. Just made our guest super uncomfortable, Jules. Well done. It only took, 30 seconds into the podcast, and now we're off and running.
Well, the script is kind of like, it was like, oh, this is kind of inconsistent. I was like, yeah. Hey, Ryan, nice to meet you finally.
Nice to meet you.
In like podcast media landscape world.
Of course, this is my first time being on a podcast. So.
And we're sharing the awkward one earbud apiece while we're talking into the same microphone. But we're also recording two separate files for this because, of course, we're weird like that.
I don't think anyone needed our BTS. That's fine. I think we can get right into some tech news. But Ryan, before we jump into some news, man, so you're a production assistant. You've been doing some video editing, and you've recently started cutting together your own YouTube videos. Tell us, like, what kind of tech beat are you covering right now, and what have you started with? I saw a video of you in line for the iPhone 10.
Okay, yeah, and I just want to give you guys a quick run through. I've been a huge tech enthusiast since the launch of the T-Mobile G1. I've been following Pocketnow ever since Brandon Miniman was there. So I'm from the OG days. So a lot of the history of Pocketnow. But I work for an Asian American channel right now called the Fung Brothers. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to create tech content for mainstream consumers. So what I'm planning to do is I'm planning to do a lot of street interviews. I always see, a lot of fanboy arguments online. So there's going to be street interviews where I ask real world opinions from real people. And I just wanted to experiment with different concepts when it comes with tech to try to make it so it has a more mainstream appeal. A lot of my friends aren't into tech as we probably are.
And he's incorporated food into his content as well. It's quite interesting. I recommend that you check it out. Also, check out our podcast while we're on the air. We're going to be talking about the OnePlus 5T. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of other news that has happened this week. So what you want to do is go to Twitter and make sure that you're talking to us at the hashtag PN Weekly. We have a bunch of other people on the show right now that are just getting that conversation up and going. If you can't be here right now, if you're listening to this post production, then you should send us an email. We do these mailbag episodes every end of the month, and that would be podcast@pocketnow.com would be the email address that you send it to. But in the meantime, it's hashtag PN Weekly, and we'll be on and off our merry way.
Beautiful. All right. Well, let's run into some news breakdown. We're gonna save the OnePlus 5T conversation for second half of the show, but we've got the top headlines from Pocketnow.com. We can chew through those real quick and get the lay of the land on what's going on in all things mobile.
Indeed. So for the week of November 12th, 2017, this is all the news that is fit to podcast. There may be a Galaxy S9 Mini on the way, but we wouldn't buy it because it's all just hearsay for now. There's a Galaxy S9 Mini that's supposed to come with a Galaxy S9 and a Galaxy S9 Plus. Apparently, it's going to take on all the modern design language, such as the Infinity display. But again, we haven't seen this model since the S5 Mini. So we're going to have to keep checking on that and make sure that that's a real thing. In the meantime, Galaxy S8 and Galaxy S8 Plus users in the US on Sprint T-Mobile may have had to suffer a little bit in terms of the Android Oreo update. The Galaxy Beta program has stopped temporarily to fix an issue with those two carriers variants on those devices. In the meantime, Sprint is offering up free Hulu. This is in a direct ballad towards T-Mobile and Netflix pairing up for a free service. If you get an unlimited data plan, you'll get a free basic tier of subscription to Hulu as well. Rock Mobile is something that we might want to talk about a little bit later, but they're an interesting MVNO, and they have a deal going on with 3 months of service for 99 bucks. Usually it's $45 per month. And there's also free international calling, texting, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I do want to save this for later because there's some tequila involved in this conversation. So we'll get into that soon. And,
not enough tequila in our tech chats, I feel.
No, not enough. We certainly would like to get in our after dark.
I thought this was a family show.
This was not
not when we record at midnight. Then it's Pocketnow after dark.
We have the explicit rating on this on iTunes, dude.
We've never used it. I'm like poop and darn. Oh, I really should be swearing more during
LG is having its own Black Friday festival. These are all Black Friday deals, but they're not really. Like, they go past beyond Black Friday. In any case, if you get an LG V30 or V30 Plus, and then get any other LG product, you get up to $400 back in a prepaid card. I mean, it's that simple. There are some exclusions, but it sounds like a great deal. And yes, if you're not taking advantage of a official carrier BOGO or LG BOGO offer for the V30, or if you just buy 4 phones in total, like 2 pairs, that will count towards the $400 prepaid gift card. So that's going to be interesting. Nearly 4 million Apple Watch shipments were made in the third quarter in the wake of the Apple Watch Series 3 Cellular taking on. About a fifth of those shipments were of the cellular kind, and this is pretty interesting to see when we have competition stiffening up from Xiaomi and also Fitbit, which has revived its own smartwatch efforts in this quarter, actually. So it's interesting to see that growing again. Apple is rumored to be planning on a 3D sensor, something more like of a true depth camera that we see on the front of an iPhone 10 right now. That's allowed for Face ID and whatnot. We're going to see that on the rear of a 2019 iPhone. Yeah, we're already talking about a year plus from now. And this is only going to expand potentials for AR. They have AR Kit right now, and perhaps we're going to be seeing more software uses going beyond that. But speaking of Face ID, let's talk about a certain family from Staten Island, actually, not too far away from here, who had a little bit of a fun time trying to get their child, their son, their 10-year-old son, from not running into his mother's iPhone 10. So it's a dad and a mom. They both got iPhone 10s. And they introduced their son to it. And it's like, hey, I'm just going to try this Face ID thing out to see if it's really, what it's cracked up to be. And reliably and consistently, he has been able to unlock his mother's phone. Now, there was one time where he was also able to unlock his dad's phone, but that has been basically a fluke. So we've already dealt with the non-identical siblings. We had a couple of brothers that were able to game the system for a bit. And there's all the other kind of evil twin, type thing that's been going on. So, I mean, we're pitting down on this idea that 1 in a million attempts will be a false positive. And with all these little fringe cases of, hey, your mom, you look like your mom, or you look like your dad, and oh, I just happened to go into their iPhones as well because my faces are apparently that much similar to them. I mean, it's I don't
well
know.
It really underscores, I think, some of the disappointment where we can look at a phone like the Galaxy Note and you have more choice over how you want to protect that device. And we know Apple is not really a consumer choice kind of company. They've decided that this is how the iPhone is going to operate, and this is what we're all just going to use moving forward. But we're seeing these anecdotal test cases, and we're seeing these situations where it's probably gonna be fine for most people out there, but there are enough folks that are affected in this in a different way that it should cause some concern. And whether or not these people want to continue using Face ID instead of using like a PIN or a passcode now, that's their option. That's now their choice. What worked fine with fingerprint sensors and would have prevented this kind of unauthorized access is now no longer available. I did think it was hilarious though that who was it? Was it the father? The quote that you guys pulled from Wired. It was funny at first, but it wasn't really funny afterward. My wife and I text all the time, and there might be something we don't want him to see. Like, that's a terrible justification for like why you might want to keep your kid out of your phone.
There was also another quote that's saying, "Well, if he has a food delivery app, his mother has a food delivery app, and if the son wants to get into the iPhone 10." And just continue to buy ice creams over and over again, that would be a bad thing. And
Right.
then
Like real life loot crates.
Qualified the son by saying that he's like one of the top students in his class, and he's generally well behaved. But
now my wife has to delete her text when there's something she doesn't want Amar to look at. And like, I think this is a larger conversation in your family about boundaries and personal information and stuff.
Right.
This isn't really the issue we're talking about when it comes to security and access.
Ryan, I believe you have an iPhone 10, don't you?
Yeah, I had an iPhone 10 and I returned it because I was just so dissatisfied with it. I was about to say, I was interviewing people yesterday. I gave them the chance to go hands-on with an iPhone 10 and the Pixel 2 XL. And the thing that came up the most is most people hate the fact that they removed the fingerprint scanner. And, hearing about these cases, it just blows my mind that Apple today, like the inconsistency of Face ID. I'm surprised they even I'm surprised they even made it the sole way of authentication.
So, we've seen this spun by its hardware engineer. I forget his name off the top of my head. Well, not Craig, but that's software. But in any case, he was saying that there was never a plan to include Touch ID in this iPhone, whatever it was going to be at the time, because this was going to, if we were going to go into the future, we're going to go all the way. And that counteracts a lot of talk of designs, last minute changes, and just overall confusion and worry going on at the Apple campus, because all these parts were not coming together right, and there was worry that there wouldn't be enough time to properly test it at the software level. So it's all rhetoric aside. This has not been the most easiest thing to negotiate between the company and the consumer. And I don't think if they dug into the story a little bit more, it's just going to be more muddy.
Right, and I don't think it's as seamless. Like, what I'm trying to say is it's much easier to spoof Face ID than it is Touch ID. With Touch ID, you would have to go make an extra effort to get someone's actual fingerprint, while Face ID, you could.
Yeah. So just because you have so many data plots, you can project so many dots.
Right.
The replication rates, how easily you're able to produce the same ones, is kind of like, that's the key here. It doesn't matter how many of these things you have; it just matters that they're easily replicable. And with that cheap hack that a university did with the software, with the 3D printing of a mask, it's very finagly, but it's possible. And if there's someone out there that's willing to put in the work to get the data that you have,
right,
that's an issue.
Well, this is similar, I think, to some of the security outlets that were doing spoofing of fingerprints. So, if someone really wants your data, they'll go through that. But what I think is interesting is at the same time that we have Face ID as the system to unlock the iPhone actually does come with the hardware to defeat Face ID. Technically, you could go around with that front camera system and come up with custom software to scan someone's face to make a better map of whatever mask that you wanted to print to then get into the device. Ditto other devices too. What is it? Sony phones have that 3D mapping built into the camera, so you can send it off to like a 3D printer to make a replica of a knickknack,
Well,
or even of someone's face, of someone's.
So it's PS,
yeah,
like their
but there's
PS
also
right?
some sort of heat metric, temperature metric for body, warmth. So there's
You
Like
just
an
got to like
infrared
rub it on your
sensor.
face first, and then hold it up to the phone, and then you'll be fine.
But yeah, there's some that's inherent biometric that's not easily replicable, and that's
Because I'll still say, I mean, we kind of talked about this last week too, but there was one extra piece of safety on a fingerprint in that you could choose what finger to use. Like that in itself is actually one piece of security through obscurity. Is you're not entirely sure. I mean, we all have a pretty good idea that someone's probably mapped a thumb. On an iPhone, the way that home button works. But conceivably, I like when my mom was really using her Galaxy S5, I think it was. I think she had an index finger mapped. Like if you want, why not map a ring finger? And that's going to be one of the least likely fingers someone's going to try to get a fingerprint off of to then use on some kind of sensor.
So there's
now
definitely a chance that that could release some of the liabilities off of Touch ID, and that's what people.
But with Face ID, if I'm trying to break into your phone, Ryan, I'm pretty sure I know what face you used to like lock the phone down.
Yeah,
that's not a big mystery.
So
you have to fry your face.
You have to fry your face first.
Yeah,
This channel's called
exactly.
Face.
I want to just touch on the smartwatches for a bit because we talk about smartwatches, but it just seems it feels so stagnant recently with the demise or the malaise of Android Wear 2.0, and the pure fact that we haven't been talking about the Ionic Fitbit Ionic as much as we it made a splash. It's all been Apple Watch Series 3 cellular. Oh my God, look at the sales.
That's funny. I was debating on whether I should get my first smartwatch a few weeks ago because they were discounting the Gear S3.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and because for me, I think it's just redundant, the fact that it wouldn't last more than over a day of charge. I mean, most smartwatches, from my knowledge, they still use OLED panels, right? Tiny OLED panels. But the thing is, like I have small hands, okay, but like everything that aside from fitness tracking, like I don't need to have my notifications all the time on my phone, and just having an extra device to charge every night is just a hassle to me.
So were you thinking all about Fitbit?
I had a Fitbit before, but the problem with Fitbit, it's just a side topic, is that like the materials that they utilize, it's not hypoallergenic friendly, and plus, the heart rate sensor has to press against your wrist to get an accurate heart rate reading. So that's just an uncomfortable experience for me.
I mean, we're kind of doing the whole diagnose your problem here right now. But what have you considered Polar?
What's
Polar is a maker of heart rate sensors. They're dedicated to that kind of thing, and we've been looking at a bunch of their stuff. The M600, it runs Android Wear.
Okay.
Like they've been getting into that recently, so that's an interesting thing. Jaime Rivera has had lots of praise to go along with that. He says that the accuracy is something like a chest-mounted monitor.
You mean I'm not a huge fitness junkie, and the last time I used an Android Wear device was the LG G Watch. When it was still its first initial stages. I didn't think the watch interface was that intuitive, but I have been looking at Samsung's Tizen OS for its Gear smartwatches, and I actually think the fact that you could navigate through smartwatch with the clock ring, is that what you call it?
The bezel controls are great on that. Just to give some color, these are numbers from Canalys, and it's 3.9 million Apple Watches. Xiaomi, I believe, was second place with 3.6 million. Fitbit was 3.5 million, and then you come all the way down to fourth place, which was Samsung. But by my estimate, it's about 800,000 units. So that's a whole magnitude down.
I'm surprised. I know the Huawei watch is super popular. I'm surprised it's not one of the top sellers for Android.
They were the top 5, and they, like it said here, the Huawei Watch 2 only scored 200,000 shipments.
Oh, okay.
Which is
Well, is it for this year? Because I know it's not the first iteration, right?
Yeah.
Nope.
Sorry, I'm trying to be. I was trying to be smooth about it, but
Okay.
no. We're trying to move the mic around. It's kind of crazy. In any case, yeah, it's been kind of interesting. I've lost my train of thought. They've tried really hard. It's not their. It's not to fault them for having bad hardware. They always do an amazing job, or at least starting from like the Nexus 6P, we've been praising them.
Oh, great phone.
Great phone.
Absolutely.
Ever since then, they've done an amazing job in the hardware department. Android Wear 2.0 just cripples everything it touches.
Yes. I mean, speaking of hardware, just a side note, this is a very unpopular opinion, but I think for the first generation Pixels, I think Google just should have compromised and just let Huawei slap on their logo and had them make the first generation Pixels. The lack of front facing, because I tried to transition from a 6P to the Pixel XL, and the lack of front facing speakers, especially since Apple started implementing it last year with the 7 Plus and 7. It's just a huge letdown.
Yeah. Well, anyways, where was I gonna? I mean, I'm trying to keep the show moving because
right.
It's always interesting to see what people are. All right, so I was here originally for the OnePlus, not originally for the OnePlus 5T event, but for a thing held by Pepcom. It's one of those event organizers that gets tech ODMs and OEMs together, and they do a showcase every so often for the media. And this happened to be one of their holiday season spectaculars and whatnot. And I was gonna plop on by for that. It just so happened that day OnePlus 5T was going to happen, and it just so happened that I had a ticket. But in any case, one of the companies that I met at PepCom was Rock Mobile, and they've been around for a few years now. It was started up by one of the founders of Patron. I believe it was Patron, and also another venture capital group. And he's made a lot of money from tequila, and he just wants to give back. So, like, there's a whole bunch of stuff. One of the original plans was like it includes like telemetry, telemedicine services, and insurance from top partners like Chubb, home security from ADT, and it's like, and they go after like the underserved, underbanked communities, and it's a private venture, so they don't have things to talk about in terms of having to answer to the board or whatnot. So I mean, that kind of tickled my heart a little bit, and they have this deal going on. It's like, yeah, that's cool.
If I'm not mistaken, they're piggying back off of Sprint's CDMA network.
So the main deal for this is 3 months for $99 service. It's unlimited voice, text, and LTE.
Oh.
But it's not even like you have a high-speed data bucket. It's just regular. You go up to 20 gigabytes, and they throttle you, which is kind of standard practice. Video stream is 480p to be expected, but yeah, it's and there's also free international calling and texting, which I don't believe is standard on the Sprint side. But I'm going to check on that and let me know in the post if that is wrong. In any case, there's also a thing for Verizon too. I don't know why there's a like they can't say Verizon on their site, but it's red and it says CDMA. So that's one of their things that's going on. So I mean, props to them. That's my opinion. Well, Juan, have you ever done anything with virtual operators other than like a Project 5, which is one of our go-to?
Yeah, I mean, the only one that I'm currently using is Project Fi, and so that's to toggle T-Mobile and Sprint, and I guess like US Cellular. That I don't know I've ever driven through US Cell territory.
Through Kansas.
I think the last one that I did business with was Straight Talk, and so that was before joining the Pocketnow team. It was actually a while before joining the Pocketnow team, so it was almost maybe 4 years ago, and that was back when you had to sort of specify a T-Mobile SIM card. And they were one of the few options that I thought did a really good job of kind of balancing good coverage with sort of respectable prices. Now, like the whole MVNO space is kind of blown up. We even got a comment on Twitter, someone saying, "Hey, if you're talking about MVNOs, you should check out Ting." And I think my brother might still be on Ting. But it's one of those things. We now have a few options and a few choices for people to cover. We still have to play the same game though. What backbone service they're on, and then whether or not you get good coverage for that service. So, if you're on an MVNO that relies on Sprint, I don't know that I'd maybe recommend them out here in the Valley where Sprint coverage gets really spotty from block to block. Sometimes it's awesome, and then literally 100 yards away, you'll be down to 3G CDMA.
Yeah.
So that's really the only thing that I would say is it's not like a buyer beware, but it's just a do your homework and see who offers you not only a good rate, because the rate doesn't matter as much. I mean, like I could pay $5 a month for zero coverage, and that would be a waste of $5 a month. So you just want to know in your area who you're really doing business with and on what towers.
Yeah. I mean, like we're going into the 5G age, and everyone's been trying to get together and improve their networks. Sprint has announced its backhaul deal with Altice, a cable provider that serves a few states in the United States, and also T-Mobile's been, hey, we have 600 megahertz now, so AT&T and Verizon are kind of caught, lag with their foot lagging behind. So, I mean, the network can always change, but you want to deal with what you have right now. And Sprint might not be the best idea. Maybe Verizon is. But check it out. Check out the Rockmole thing.
Well, it's just you're just being a sweetie, giving them some love. And
I know. I have a soft heart. That's fair to say.
I think by the time like 5G becomes standard, I think it should be I think all carriers should be compliant in eliminating any tiered data plan. I mean, unless it's for a budget plan, because for LTE, I understood, like there is a lot of capacity that the towers have to handle, but like we're getting to the point where you have to compete with the rest of the world. Like either throttle and like no overages, or get rid of the tiered data plan.
Well, a lot of what, the unsexy thing about virtual operators, that they purchase data wholesale, and so that's part of the bucketing that they have to do. But
right.
Yeah. In any case, Sprint, Hulu. Which do you usually use more often, Hulu or Netflix? Juan?
Oh no, I'm on Netflix all the time.
Netflix?
Yeah. Now it just kind of feels, it doesn't feel a little bit, and I don't mean to besmirch any of these companies, but if you were looking at not one of the first or second place cell phone carriers, I think a lot of people are probably shopping T-Mobile more aggressively than Sprint. So that feels like Sprint's like the consolation prize of carriers. And then the same thing, with the original content that's going out on Netflix right now. I kind of feel like there are a ton of people who are still on Hulu, but Netflix is making more noise. So Hulu starts to feel like the consolation prize video streaming service. And it's like T-Mobile and Netflix and then Sprint and Hulu, it's like, it's got like that kind of consumer awareness disparity between the partnerships.
Not to politically inject things into it, but there's so the advantage to AT&T and Verizon is that they're farming their own original content, and it's in their exclusive pens and whatnot. And they typically, sometimes they use B grade stars and that we haven't really heard of. Whereas recently we've had to deal with the sexual assault allegations that have kind of made viewing kind of a guilty thing, kind of a debate, and wondering, okay, should I really be paying my money to these kinds of services? And on Hulu, which is has all the network programming, there's always going to be something that you can point to for a star that's started. And then there's also Netflix, which is the big kahuna of original content that's its own thing. So, and of course, we've had a couple of big names that have confessed to this. So it's always interesting to see, the dynamics externally of, these media companies getting together with the tubes, with the pipe providers, and seeing what happens. Because if they're not integrated and they can't have a shared bottom line, well, we're trying to see if this makes economical sense for the carriers and for the media companies at this point.
Well, thank God I use Crunchyroll.
Anime, or K-dramas, or whatever.
Yeah.
They get a lot of those things. I enjoy K-dramas.
Well, I'm shocked that Project Fi doesn't have a tie-in with YouTube Red now.
Oh,
that
that'd
would be
be
a cool thing.
that would be
a
that would
damn
be
cool thing.
like someone on Google
You should
watching
be
this right
you should
now.
be on the VP of marketing, dude.
I totally should. I mean, not a VP. I need to be a president of marketing.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what needs to happen.
No V, just P.
He has a
That's
presidential
right.
voice.
Yeah. And finally, the S9 Mini. How do you feel about small phones these days?
I did not get a chance to read the article on Pocketnow, but upon
there's very little. It's just a whole bunch of waffling from other sources, and they're talking about other sources.
When I heard you said S9 Mini, I was assuming, okay, this is not going to be a real mini S9. It's going to be a mid-range version, because the last time I think there was a proper compact version of a flagship that was probably Sony Xperia.
Yeah, no, even the XZ, which was recently. Like, when was the last time you thought they released a compact phone?
Never. I think the Pixel is like the closest
They
compact.
released one this quarter, which shows how much awareness Sony has.
Oh no, I thought you meant all the OEMs in general.
No, I mean, yeah, but still, it shows how much favor Sony has in the market, which is to say not much at all.
But those bezels, because they mainly sell in Japan, and those bezels are thick.
I mean, to be fair,
they're not any thicker than the Pixel 2.
True. Well, I'll say this. Like I said, upon first impression, I didn't get to read up on these rumors yet, but I thought it was going to be a mid-range device that was probably going to head to T-Mobile, or it's just going to sell in Asia. It's never going to come stateside, and there's probably going to be some compromise on the specs as well. It'd probably be a 1080p display. But from what I'm hearing, if it does have an infinity display, I think this could truly be a compact flagship.
That's always our hope. And infinity display, we're talking about 10, even if it's like a 4-inch 1080p display, that's going to be up there in the pixel density.
Yeah. But what's the rumored screen size?
Well, sub 5 inches is the thing.
Sub 5 inches, really?
Which would be crazy on a 2x1, since the height to width ratios.
Do we know if it's a 16:9 or 18:9
aspect? Infinity. I mean, you would just it'd
be 16:9. It'd
be 18.5:9, which is
okay.
Display. When we talk about infinity display, it encompasses the aspect ratio, I would think. Samsung, correct me if I'm wrong, Samsung.
Do you think, Juan? Do you think the S9 Mini, if there is one, do you think it'll come stateside?
No, I don't. I think the majority of the marketing that Samsung puts into the United States is going to focus on an S9 and an S9 Plus, just like we saw this year with an S8 and S8 Plus. I agree with the sentiment. Unfortunately, right now, smaller phones aren't making any headlines. The Xperia XZ1 Compact was one of my favorite phones of the year. I mean, it's right up there for me with the V30 and the BlackBerry Key 1 in courting a very specific audience. And when that phone's right for you, it is literally a perfect fit for you, as opposed to sort of an all-rounder. If Samsung were to pull this off, I unfortunately think Samsung would probably fall down the trap of making it a mid-range device banking off of the S series name, like they did before with the S5 Mini. I would really love to see their take on a 4.7 to 4.9, maybe even a 5-inch 18.5:9 aspect ratio, because that would be a legitimately small phone. The regular S8 is a 5.8-inch, which fits in roughly the same general volume of space as like a 5.1-inch phone, like a Huawei P10, something in that
Galaxy S7. From last year.
I mean, it was even a little bit smaller. The Galaxy S8 was even a little bit smaller than the Galaxy S7 with its 5.1-inch display. I mean, again, sort of overall volume.
Yeah, the one thing that I would say is that I think we're talking being a gap between 2014 or 2015 and 2017, and mid-rangers. Like, if you were to put a mid-range chip from then into a phone now, that'd be stupid, and we would.
That thing will never get software updates.
2017, yeah, exactly. Too. But 2017 mid-rangers, talking about Snapdragon 625, we're talking about more capable chips that drag less and just are known for their endurance. So I think we're in pretty safe territory, even if this is a mid-ranger. I'm not
Right,
sure,
but I think the conversation we would have is Samsung don't get out of bed for less than $1 billion. You know,
Yeah.
It's not whether or not I think Samsung could have the chops to deliver something. It's if it's called an S9 Mini, they're banking on the cachet of the S name, and we know that that's going to be a premium phone. It's just disappointing because I miss some of the more daring design experiments of Samsung of old.
Right.
One of my all-time favorite phones is I think people have heard me say this before. I think Samsung peaked with the Note 4, and now my favorite phones from Samsung are all actives. But that same year, we got the Galaxy Alpha, and that was an
yes.
amazing small form factor phone. It was just a little ahead of its time for that smaller battery capacity with the chipsets that were coming out around the Qualcomm 801, 805 era. It really couldn't hang as an all-day companion content device.
Right.
Nowadays, if we were to deliver something like that, I think we would be in much better territory.
Wasn't the Galaxy Alpha an AT&T exclusive in the US though?
It was too,
I
which
think
also
that's
kind of
what
hamstrung
really
it,
killed it.
definitely.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I hate
I don't think
to-
it killed it, but Samsung had already started moving on. I think like they had looked at that sort of harder edged rectangular look with the grippy back as opposed to having glass, and we were already sort of shifting to
That was the
the Galaxy
precursor to the S6 and S6 Edge. Like
Yeah.
they're just kind of experimenting with
And
the chamfered edges.
unfortunately, the Alpha, I think, was just sort of a phone in the pipeline that really didn't have much support. I think if it had been advertised as hard as like the Note 4, it would have been a more popular option even for its AT&T exclusivity. But we know that Samsung can put out a nice small form factor device. It's more, can they find the niche where that's appropriate? They can keep their profit margins high, and we don't feel like we're getting an overly compromised device that's more about labels than it is actual performance. And that's a really difficult balancing act right now. When I just got my hands on a Moto G5S, it's a $250 phone, and this thing is kind of awesome. You know, especially when we're going to be talking about OnePlus 5T territory now. The guys playing at the mid-range, and I mean that in terms of pricing, like with $1,000 phone out there from Samsung and Apple, $500 devices are mid-pack players now. And under that, we're getting amazing experiences. I don't know that we need to turn to a Samsung to deliver a mini that we're going to pay more for that Samsung badge on the back.
There's plenty of tide shifting between. I mean, Huawei itself is trying to go for the gun and reach #1 volume by what 2020 or 2019 or whatever. So, like any chance that we can see new operator or even like older mid-size operators try and run the score up, I think is definitely.
Yeah, but I think Samsung's strength will probably be playing more in like a Galaxy A series. Like if they really want to make the move into a small form factor phone or a mid-ranger or something like that, if they call it an A series, and this is what's so funny is this is how much names matter, right?
I think any consumer who would buy a potential S9 Mini, they wouldn't be a tech enthusiast like you and I. They would just be buying the S9 Mini based on the Samsung brand name. Like they wouldn't know that they could get an essential phone for 500.
I mean, it's simply put, they have the cachet, they have the marketing dollars, and it sucks, to have to be complacent about it. But
and I have to say, every time the signature Samsung theme song, it gets to me. Dun, 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 dun. It makes everything seems 10 times more beautiful. Like I was about to pick up a Note 8 instead of my Pixel XL2 just because they had a really good like marketing video.
yeah,
Like everyone's always so happy when they're taking selfies.
yeah. Whenever it boots up, they're like, do the thing again.
Like dun, 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 dun.
Unfortunately, OnePlus didn't get to incorporate that. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh.
And that. Yeah. We're gonna get to that in just a few minutes. The PN Weekly hashtag has been dominated by conversation about the OnePlus 5T, so we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, you can see full details on these stories and more. Just hit pocketnow.com and look for the podcast section to get to this episode's rundown, and you can chat with us about what you have been reading up on with the hashtag PN Weekly. Also, be sure to check out Jaime Rivera and the Pocketnow Daily on our YouTube channel.
Right on.
That's it. Like that's
show over. Okay, well, thanks for watching.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Well, what I think Jules is inelegantly trying to say is that we're moving now to a sponsor break so that we can thank the company that's sponsoring this episode of the Pocketnow Weekly. And that's App River. Now, App River says technology is a great thing as long as it makes our lives easier. For business owners, the advancement of technology can be a double-edged sword since cyber criminals are using that very same technology to cause data breaches, as well as create ransomware and phishing schemes. Kind of like we were talking about the iPhone 10. They have the exact same technology to defeat what you're using to secure your data. Fortunately, defending your business with high-tech security solutions doesn't have to be complicated thanks to App River. With cloud-based services designed to protect your business from cyber attacks, App River has you covered. Whether keeping spam and viruses out of your inbox or shielding your network from both external and internal web threats, App River has proven technology that will keep your business ahead of the cyber curve, all without any additional hardware or software. They also offer enterprise-grade email encryption and Office 365 to keep your business productivity dialed in. And all of this comes with a free, fully functional 30-day trial, so you can be sure that you're getting the technology your business needs. Plus, all App River services are backed with around-the-clock phenomenal care, customer service from real App River employees who are experts at solving your problems. Visit appriver.com/weekly to get started today. That's appriver.com/weekly to start that 30-day free trial. And we thank them for supporting the Pocketnow Weekly.
Indeed, we do. And we also thank you for continuing to talk about the OnePlus 5T as we go along on this very fast-paced show, because this has been a breakneck year, in my opinion, for just smartphones. We've had the most stacked fall to date, with a couple of HTC, of course Apple, but LG with its usual V phone, and usual. We're talking about 2015. They started the V lineup, so that's kind of crazy. So it's just insane to imagine if we can continue to keep up this sort of pace. But in terms of the OnePlus 5T, I think it's kind of the most controversial in terms of its pace, don't you think? Because it's like, oh, hey, here's the OnePlus 5 in summer, and then we're going to shut this down and make the OnePlus 5T, just like last year. But people were kind of, I got a sense in the room at the event in Brooklyn that this was not really
well, I think you guys should start off there. What was the event like?
So the events,
I had a blast.
Yeah,
Just like by meeting everyone there, but I didn't have a blast about the 5T because as a Verizon customer, no CDMA support kind of just killed it for me. But the general impression that I have of the whole OnePlus 5 and 5T strategy, it's the same way I felt with what Samsung did with the S6 and the Note 5.
Yeah.
It's not much of a difference. It's just a difference in screen size. Same goes for OnePlus. I don't think they really changed any of the specs aside from the 18:9 aspect ratio.
Let's get into the fact sheet a little bit here. So of course the 835, same as the OnePlus 5. Different screen, as he said, 6 inches, but it's a 2x1 display. It has the same optic AMOLED technology as before, with wide color gamut and very it's a 80% screen to body ratio, and you have this typical 6 gigs or 8 gigs of RAM. The cameras, and I believe this is where Juan can come in on this, because they went with a zoom strategy for a dual camera system in the rear for the OnePlus 5. And they've changed it up, I believe, because they have this new sensor instead. The 20 megapixel support sensor is the Sony IMX376K, which I believe is for black, as in CMYK, with the cyan, magenta, color.
It's a monochrome sensor.
Yeah, monochrome sensor, which helps out for details, for lossless zoom they're promoting for this. They're both at the same focal length. So I was wondering if this gives more credence to what Huawei has been doing instead of Apple. They have had their own roads to hoe for dual camera systems between zoom and the color mono thing. I was wondering what your take on that is.
Well, so far, my favorite dual sensor strategy is still matched sensors. Huawei started this off using with Leica's design, where you had a color and RGB sensor and a monochrome sensor that for JPEGs, the images from both of those sensors are merged, and it creates a really lovely contrasty and detail effect that you can't get with a single sensor solution. Like we still haven't seen it duplicated from a single sensor. So, I mean, the different dual sensor strategies, you've got a zoom in from Samsung and Apple, and I think Asus is employing that. OnePlus was using that on the OnePlus 5. You've got a wide, which only LG has been doing, so that the secondary sensor is an ultra wide, almost a panorama in a single click kind of field of view. And then now we've got Huawei, Motorola. Motorola is using matched sensors, and the OnePlus 5T. So they all have their individual pros and cons. For me, I'm always going to be happiest with your everyday normal photos being augmented. And so LG did something really interesting with the glass lens in the V30, where it's a really crispy look. It's one of the sharpest phone cameras we've ever reviewed. And then that's got to be contrasted against Huawei with Leica using this image merging process. The problem that the worry I have with OnePlus is replicating the hardware is only a third the battle. There's a very particular look that I enjoy from Huawei cameras, and that all has to come down to taking the image data from two sensors and merging it through a very particular aesthetic, and that's that Leica look. I think it's really funny when people complain like, oh, well, in low light photos on my Huawei's, I see a little extra grain and it's a little noisier. And Leica engineers have never been afraid of noise. They consider texture in your photos a feature, not a bug. And so I like the look of that style of photography, especially you start pushing into low light or you want that monochrome look. It's got a very photographic feel to the output from that camera. I am not entirely confident that OnePlus engineers can replicate that or come up with their own aesthetic to be pleasing. So right now, hopefully what we'll see is an improvement to contrast and clarity, and that OnePlus engineers have found a photo look. Like maybe they go with a slightly more HDR style processing, where the exposure rates between the main camera sensor, the color sensor, and the black and white sensor captures more dynamic range in a more sort of a squashed kind of HDR look. That could be an interesting benefit. But the other thing that we've got to take a look at is, I believe this is only going to be an electronically image stabilized setup. So that we're not going to have hardware stabilization on the main camera like we do on Huawei, which takes us all the way back to the P9. P9 was still a wonderful performer for stills. I have every faith that OnePlus has the horsepower to electronically or software stabilize video. But these are a lot of changes. This is a very different setup from where we were on the OnePlus 5. And this is a company that tends to need that extra couple updates out of the box before these things are running smooth. So the initial reviews that you're going to see on the 5T, if the cameras are performing kind of weak, I wouldn't be overly concerned, because every single time we've had a OnePlus, it's around the 6-month mark that stuff starts getting really good.
yeah, that's totally understandable. And there, I'm going to switch to the narrative surrounding the 5T in just a second, because I think that brings up a good point. But I just think that the OnePlus 5 was heavily crippled by a zoom lens with a 2.6 f style.
Oh man,
that was
well. But I don't know that any other zoom lens has been so substantially better. I mean, isn't the Galaxy Note really the top performer at like f1.9? Is that what it's at?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, f1.9.
Because it's not just the aperture; it's also the fact that these zoom sensors, so that you don't have a huge lump of glass sticking out the back of your phone, these zoom sensors are also smaller. So you're dealing with the crop factor. It's kind of like if you go from a full frame camera to an APS-C, but you use the same lens, it looks like you've zoomed. And it's because you're using less of the glass on that lens. So you're actually cropping the glass. You're not cropping from a digital sense, like you're cutting pixels out of a photo.
That goes to the sensor size too. And, you still need light. You still need a discernible amount of light in order to put.
Well, and that's why I actually really do like this move of going to matched sensors.
Yeah.
So for example, if you try and use portrait mode on an iPhone or a Note, The Note can go darker than the iPhone can. So like it can push farther into night, but the portrait mode depends on the zoom sensor being the main capture sensor and the wider sensor being the one that's fleshing out the depth information for the camera to know where to blur the background. That means that for the iPhone, there are just plenty of times, even in regular indoor lighting, that the iPhone's going to tell you, oh, you don't have enough light to use portrait mode, or you're too close because there's a minimum focusing distance that zoom sensor can reach, and it's way farther away from the phone than the normal sensor. So with matched sensors, you don't have that problem. You get depth information from two of the same focal length sensors, and those sensors should be larger. So because both of the sensors are the same size, they're both larger, you don't have to worry about playing this game of shrinking one sensor down to reach a higher crop factor to simulate the experience of a 2x optical zoom.
So the whole premise is better overall in terms of for this iteration, and that any rough bugs that might be coming, should be smoothed out. And that gets into the narrative that they wanted to paint at OnePlus, where they basically went through the entire history of the company. If you want to go in and jump in, when I'll start off by saying the OnePlus One. I'm, what's fun? Vacuum cleaning. That's what's happening.
Well, I actually have yet to use a smartphone with a match sensor because none of the OEMs are available on Verizon. But I'll say it's interesting to see if Google does adopt a dual camera setup. Like if it's interesting to see which type of setup they go for. I personally think they're either going to go for a zoom lens or a wide angle lens. I don't think they're going to go with a match sensor.
If ever they do decide to go with a dual thing, they have obviously demonstrated with their single camera unit on the Pixel 2 and Pixel 2 XL that portrait and the computational mathematics have been able to do, for the most part, pretty good jobs on portrait mode, which is one of the big hyper things that is a consumer trend in electronics, which is weird. But when they talked about the OnePlus One and listening to the fans, and they decided, admitted to going for the mainstream for the OnePlus 2 and the OnePlus X, and they found not that much take up. They found lots of enthusiasm, but not much take up because it wasn't the product for them, and so they realized that they cubbied themselves in. And since that's been the story since the OnePlus 3, where they do value hardware, as we've seen the price go up, of course, but flagship hardware, which is their main bread and butter.
No disrespect to OnePlus, but if they so claim that they were listening to the fans when developing the OnePlus 5T, I think they should have implemented a wide angle lens, because I don't think the majority of OnePlus fans are really into portrait photography. That's my 2 cents. I think they would much rather.
I disagree. I think we're kind of looking at the influence that Oppo has over this space, and they make a lot of selfie and portrait-y kinds of phones.
True.
So I think they're getting to piggyback on that, but that's sort of become one of the general consumer trends. Apple does it, and now we kind of expect flagship grade phones to have some kind of software background blur effect. And so I understand why they're doing it. It makes sense to me that this is a part of the strategy that they're wanting to keep pace with the rest of the industry.
Yeah, it's a whole propagation. And of course, when Mate2, a Chinese company that has this selfie, does all the selfie phones and the selfie apps, and it gets take up in US for at least a little bit. I mean, that's part of our culture now, and that's pretty much ingrained.
Yeah. Then again, though, the story about the wide angle lens is not that great, anyways. From what I understood, prior to the V30, there's a fishball effect.
Very well to the fishball effect.
Yeah, there's definitely barrel distortion on the V20 and on the G5, but from in one generation of phones to the next, that's radically improved. And I find that if we're going to change focal lengths, the wide angle is significantly more beneficial if you're that kind of person who's out traveling, or you want to get a bunch of people in a shot, or you want someone there and still be able to see the background.
Like the ultimate thing.
And in fact, even with the V20, sorry, Jules, real quick, even with the V20, when my daughter took her first steps, I was really grateful I had the V20 because I was way too close to her to get video of it until I flipped wide, and I was able to capture the whole living room sitting from the couch so that I could catch her first steps. I could catch her walking. If I'd had a phone with the zoom sensor, that wouldn't have meant anything to me. It would have been useless to try and use that. And even a normal sort of field of view, that sort of 26 to 30 millimeter equivalent field of view, I would have gotten a great like portrait shot, like head and shoulders of her taking her first steps. But that, who cares? Like, that's not what you need.
You know, what you're taught in journalism classes, that your feet are the ultimate zoom in your photos. So I think the ultimate form of that is mobile photography, where you can walk up to your daughter or son or whoever else, but you can never get far enough away to to capture the whole thing, the whole of the magical Wonderland castle that is part of Disney World or whatever the heck that you need. So I mean, that's all a part of the optical story of OnePlus 5. I do want to touch on a couple of other things here, and that is one of them being software. Didn't launch with Android Oreo. That's going to be on a beta program from late this year up through early 2018. You would have hoped that Oreo. I feel like.
And you had the UX guy just making a whole spiel about stock Android, and he just goes like, "And we're not launching with Nougat."
but yeah, that's true.
Like, okay.
But, yeah, I mean, I feel like OEMs have been lagging on Oreo as opposed to Nougat, where there was more of a hype of, hey, here's the LG V20, the first ever with Nougat, and that's great and all, and I wish there was more excitement around Android-based OS updates.
I think probably this year the priorities for each OEMs have kind of changed. I think this year a lot of them are expanding beyond, like, because I think unless you're Apple and Samsung and maybe LG, like the smartphone market, it's not really going to generate you a lot of profit. So I think a lot of OEMs are looking for other like revenues. So like I don't think.
And I think the narrative changed.
I mean, I would love for OS updates to be a bigger thing in the Android world, but
the priority changed in terms of hardware because they have the display these days.
Right,
That's
right.
the big thing. Oh, look at this extra wide display, as opposed to, well, we've iterated all we can. We've introduced dual cameras last year, the year before, and now we're going to, oh yeah, hey, look at this thing. It's software, and that's important.
Right.
So it's like one of the last things.
Right. Yeah. I'm not going to defend Samsung here because I don't think they're a perfect company. But when the Note 8 launched with Nougat, I was perfectly fine with it because it's not like Oreo offered anything significantly like better than what Samsung was, because they already have some form of picture-in-picture, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And you can theme it, and
I
think
they had that before, like LG and Samsung had that before, like it was Nougat.
Yeah, and Samsung has done a great job of optimizing the Samsung user experience. That's what they're calling TouchWiz now, apparently. Samsung user experience.
yeah. That's
but
right.
yeah.
And also the fact that there is no. Speaking of the display, there's not going to be that jelly scrolling thing apparently, because it's not going to be upside down. Is that the case here?
Oh, well, what phone is the 5T?
Or the 5T? Yeah,
they're using a panel from Samsung, right?
We're assuming it's the same panel that's probably in the Mate 10 Pro.
Yeah, that's going to be, if that's going to be the case. So I mean, it's a different part. So at least if the problem pops up there, then we know where else it's going to pop up. But we haven't seen it pop up yet, so that's good news. It's not really a big thing in terms of the whole totality of the phone, but it's that, like, the people were very nitpicky about that issue last time around. It was like they could just pick them on every little piece.
Oh, I would be like, yeah, especially like if you're scrolling.
Would Jelly Scroll really have convinced you not to buy the 5 if that had been your phone of choice? Everything else is spot on. That's exactly what you wanted in a phone. It's the price point that you want in sort of that premium mid-range territory, but this scrolling gets a little bouncy when you go through a list. That would have convinced you not to buy it.
That's the same thing that happened with me with the Pixel 2 XL. I was a little bit forgiving with the with the blue shifting, but like before Google came out and said we're gonna add saturated color profiles, I was like, man, for $850 for this type of
Right,
display.
but we're talking for like $450.
Yeah, for 400. I mean, I think because I'm constantly on my phone watching content, it would depend on how bad it is when it's an all white background. But
yeah, I mean, it depends on the usage case per unit. Like if you're buying a phone, no matter how much it is, for one thing, it better do what it says on the tin can, right?
And the display is first and foremost when you're
that's
the
that's
smartphone experience,
the main
right?
Interface.
Yeah. So
yeah. And then I want to give a quick mention to Star Wars. Apparently, The Last Jedi is going to be coming out next month. And there's been some code digging going on by some good folks. There was an anonymous source, but XDA really helped us out here. And apparently there might be not only a Star Wars theme going on, but also a Star Wars dedicated OnePlus 5T limited edition device. We've seen
and you only need to use your OnePlus 5T for 4,528 hours before you unlock all of the premium character wallpapers.
Yeah, that's you have to 100%.
Or, I mean, you could also buy a bunch of like wallpaper crates. I think it's only going to be like around $2,000 worth of wallpaper crates to get all of the premium characters unlocked.
I mean, that's true.
OnePlus 5T.
Or you could fly to France. I mean, weren't the last two limited edition things for OnePlus? They had the
I was making a Battlefront 2 joke. I don't know where you're going, Jules. I'm sorry. I really wanted to yes and
crystals.
You went off in another direction, and now I don't know.
Salty about the crystals. They shut down the in-app purchases. We can move on from that because
they shut down the in-app purchases for now. In-app purchases are coming back. I guarantee you, in-app purchases are coming back after the phone's initial burst, after the game's initial burst of sales. Yeah. I guarantee you, they're going to be like, we're not going to change the leveling structure. You're still going to have to grind for 4,000 hours. Oh, but wouldn't it be great if we had these loot boxes back? That's totally what they're going to do.
I have no idea what's going on either.
I don't know anything much about Star Wars, but I just remember back in the days, Motorola had the exclusivity on Star Wars, like Star Wars, like the R2D2 like droids.
Yeah. Those were intense things. And then OnePlus, as I've been trying to say, OnePlus has limited edition devices with the 3T. They partnered with the French design firm Colette, and then also this Jean Charles de Castelbajac. Sorry if I'm butchering his name, but they partnered with a OnePlus 5T, OnePlus 5 design. Now, if OnePlus is going to partner, if these things come out, veracity is true, this is going to be one of the biggest media franchise tie-ups for OnePlus. That's going to be important for them. I'm not sure if.
Well, I think it's important to note, what have we been seeing? We've been seeing OnePlus try and find avenues where they can pivot mainstream. This is taking us back to what was that gentleman's name? He posted that really great video talking about how brands can't succeed.
Martin Bartza.
Yes, Martin Bartza.
I love that guy.
Yeah,
talking about how a brand can't succeed if it's only courting like super hardcore diehard enthusiasts. Like you have to find avenues where you can reach general consumers. And that one of the main ways that you can do that is by trying to find some kind of licensing deal or licensing agreement. Overseas, they don't seem to have problems, Oppo and OnePlus, reaching out to local celebrities. I don't mean local as in like, hometown, but I mean like regional celebrities. And if they're going to continue to find any kind of traction in North America, especially away from the angriest and loudest Android enthusiasts outside of that community talking about their product, then this is a huge step in the right direction for them.
Well,
like they tried to shut down the phone on jelly scrolling, and literally something that most people that use the phone would probably have considered a feature. Okay. Oh, look at how cute the bouncy animations are when I scroll. This is fun. It reminds me of my Palm Pre. That would have been a feature for a lot of consumers if it had been billed that way. But Android geeks had to try and savage the phone brand based on them mounting the screen upside down.
So I guess
that's the echo chamber. Why court geeks anymore? Why not just swing mainstream?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about mainstream, they have all the credit in the world and all the money in the world to buy a phone, right? So let's talk about price. It went up again. It went up by $20, but it went up again. So it's $499 for the base model, 6 gigs of RAM, 64 gigabytes of storage. If you're talking about 8 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes of storage, that's $559, which again, the whole story of things, it's good. All these feature upgrades worth the $20. Yes. When we look at it as a story, when we started out at $300, where the attention's being turned away from tech enthusiasts that wanted very value-oriented hardware to, well, I'm not sure what their attitude is in terms of software and whatnot, and just clean Android and this whole stock attitude thing or anti-stock.
I think this is actually probably the right play. The higher price tag actually will go hand in hand with consumers treating this like more of a premium product. The fact that it's still in this sub $600 territory might actually work against it for general consumers who are like, well, it's probably not as good as my iPhone, or it's probably not as good as the Samsung, even though it's covering all of the basics in a way that most consumers would probably find more than adequate for their daily smartphone computing needs. So again, this is where you have to walk that fine balance. If they just came out with the phone tomorrow that was $699, they would be savaged. They would be, oh, they're trying to pull an essential. Oh no, look at OnePlus. They're doing all this stuff. Like, you can't have that conversation immediately. So you kind of have to lobster pot your way to making your brand more recognizable for people who are also going to consider it a nice product and not a compromised product because it's less expensive.
Do you think, I mean, it starts at $499, right?
Yeah.
Do you think pricing for the components, do you think they could have squeezed in at least a quad HD display? Because if you think about it, 2 years ago, like $499 was the starting price for a Nexus 6P, and that was almost a complete package. Like, I don't know if Google was taking a loss on that, but
I
think Google was probably at such a razor thin margin on Nexus because the point of Nexus wasn't to reach consumers.
Right.
The point of Pixel is to reach consumers, and what did we see from the 6P to the Pixel?
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
I just
Right.
my Google Assistant by talking about Google.
Yeah. Hey,
Sorry.
Google. Bye,
Google's
Google.
always listening. That's
Oh, Jesus.
I stopped my. Oh, dang.
so at $499.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what pricing on panels we could expect that they would have the market leverage to get that kind of preferred pricing on AMOLED. What I think is really interesting is how close this phone lands in a comparison against a Huawei Mate 10 Pro.
I never had a chance to use any Huawei smartphones.
Well, no, but I mean, like go spec to spec. So there are improvements from the Mate 10 Pro over the OnePlus 5, but we've got probably the same AMOLED panel, the same dimensions, the same size. The Mate 10 Pro has a larger battery, but 3,300 milliamp hour battery on the OnePlus 5T is certainly not a deal breaker. Similar performing chipset between the Kirin 970 and the OnePlus 5T and just sort of raw computing power, but the Mate 10 is going to have all this neural processing unit, AI on chip kind of customization stuff happening, if that's a benefit, if you like that. Dual cameras that perform very similarly, and then the Mate 10 Pro arrives with water resistance. Now, the Mate 10 Pro is obviously a better phone across the board. Every single individual metric, there's some benefit to having the Mate 10 Pro. Does all of that add up to a device that's 80% more expensive than a OnePlus 5T? And that becomes a much more difficult question to answer.
Right. From my last experience using a Huawei phone, like hands-on at a electronic retailer, I thought their software is kind of clunky, but I did appreciate the extra like features that were built in. I haven't used like OnePlus's Oxygen OS, but I think some consumers might see the added software like features as like a benefit, like a justification for the higher price. And
there is something to be said. I don't like Huawei software design. Like, I don't like the look of EMUI. But having used a Mate 9 almost every single day since it's launched, this has been the phone that has aged the best out of
Right.
any Android device that I've used, minus maybe last year's Pixel XL. Like they're neck and neck. And for all of that custom software and all of their appeals to better garbage collection and better resource management, I find that those claims to be somewhat accurate. You know, I haven't ever felt the need to wipe out a Huawei like I have a Samsung after 4 months, and it starts to just get that little bit of the jank, just that little bit of the Samsung twitch going on. So it's the double-edged sword. I really wish I could have that kind of optimization and long-term stability with something that was closer to stock Android, with something that was cleaner, that was more material design and less of this EMUI aesthetic, and that would make me really happy.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think the Pixel 2 XL is going to age well? Just using it sometimes it does.
I mean, if it starts out, with all these problems that people say that they have. I mean, if they come out with an RMA and that Pixel 2 XL is going to be fine, then I mean, all's fair in love and war, basically.
So again, it depends on what we're talking about with aging. I don't think the Pixel 2s are going to age well from a hardware perspective. I think they're going to look pretty rough after about 6 months of daily use if you don't have them in a case with a screen protector on.
Oh, I'm talking about the software experience.
But the software side is where I have confidence, because Google's not a hardware company. They're trying, they're making efforts, but they're not. They don't make hardware, they make software. And I think, like the Pixel XL, I think the software is going to age really well, but we're getting to a point where, being able to differentiate, like, oh, my screen's got a ton of burn-in and the microphone's died and one of the speakers is crackling. Oh, but the software is so smooth. Like, that's a terrible smartphone experience. That's not a thing for an $800 phone. That's barely something we would have put up with on a Nexus 5X.
If that's the case, Huawei might be the only smartphone manufacturer in my current mindset right now that has a good combination of both hardware and software, because Apple has really dropped the ball lately with iOS.
iOS 11 is pretty rough right now.
It's pretty rough, and they have to play catch up. It's it's great to be responsive to these bugs, but when you're ending up having to do a lot of public, dirty laundry about that, it's kind of rough to see, and that's not really
I actually need to start getting going here pretty soon, guys. I want to go through some of the PN Weekly comments that we've been getting on Twitter from Andrew Wallace at Fat Produce, recently a guest on the podcast. I still don't understand why OnePlus refuses to include an external SD card slot on their devices for that $500 plus price point. I think we're actually going to start seeing the SD card slot vanish like we do the headphone jack. I don't think that's long for this world.
They tried that in 2015, and it didn't really work out with the 16.
Mate 10 Pro, Pixel, iPhone keeps reinforcing it, and we're in a market where if Apple can do it, anyone can do it. I think we're going to start seeing it vanish.
Maybe even 256. If 256 can be a new standard, then hey, I think we'll play ball.
I think that would be strategy.
Ben Cherian, PN Weekly, the OnePlus stepped up the display quality as far as the rest of the phone is okay now. Not saying 2K, but a better tuned 1080p display to see and feel as class leading. I don't know, we had the hands-on video.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like, it looks like it's going to be a solid performer. I've been happy with the Mate 10 Pro screen. There's nothing that really makes me feel like I'm compromised by using a 1080p wide display.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, what we saw under dim, stupid trade show lights,
it was better than the Pixel 2 XL in my hands-on experience. Yeah.
So I mean, that's a low bar to set.
Oh, that's true.
I mean, but anyways, in terms of all this coverage that we're going to have for the OnePlus 5T, Jaime Rivera is going to be handling the book of that. And you'll be expecting it sometime in the next few days or so.
But for everyone on this podcast now, the last one I want to get to is from Panzer Z. With the announcement of the 5T at $499, is it really the deal that it used to be when you compare it against the Essential PH1, which is currently at $449? Bam.
What's at $449 now?
Yeah, it's $449.
Sophie's choice. What do you do?
What was the question?
Essential phone at $449. Essential phone at $449 or OnePlus 5T at $499.
I would choose the essential phone.
Really?
Yes, I would.
For the
Yep,
$50.
neither. I would too. I'd be a little concerned about the camera performance. I think OnePlus would probably beat it there.
Yeah.
But I love that ceramic and titanium build.
Exactly.
The design is more progressive. I don't know. I'd probably go. I personally would probably go PH1.
No, and the LCD, on the essential phone, it's not bad. I actually think it looks great, especially with the thin bezels. It just melts in. I like it.
I would want to get into the ecosystem a little bit, the accessories and the connector that they have, and I don't.
Oh, that's so gimmicky.
If I were to do that, if I were to go into essential, I don't see myself getting into that.
I mean, there is no ecosystem aside from the 360 camera, and I heard that was pretty clunky.
Third parties are so much fun. And so reliable too, you know that.
Yeah, I don't see anyone picking up wireless USB as a standard when we have real USB and you can just plug stuff into the bottom port. But again, phone to phone, I mean, like there is no ecosystem for OnePlus. I mean, they've got a really nice backpack.
They have a really nice backpack.
You can buy a really nice backpack with OnePlus on it, and that's your big accessory add-on for the OnePlus 5T.
I need to get a backpack, dude.
Yeah, they do have really nice backpacks.
I'm mad now. All right.
So real quick before we jump, I do want to screen share something real fast here. This is just to kind of show off the difference.
We're backloading a whole bunch of stuff here on the show.
Yeah, we are. So this is a portrait mode photo, or they call it wide aperture mode photo from the Huawei Mate 10 Pro.
Very well defined with the beanie cap on, and they got
excellent cutting out around all of that, especially with all like the sides and the vents and the door frame and everything else, and that it's in pretty dim and dark conditions.
It's pretty good.
And then I have to pull up. This is from the same position. This is from the Note 8. So this is the difference when we talk about a zoom sensor in low light conditions versus dual matched sized sensors in low light conditions. This is one of the reasons why I consider this to be such a significant advantage. This is an indoor lit shot. This is like one lamp from my kitchen is lighting.
A rainbow swirl going on with the noise that's popping up.
Oh,
well, and you can see that this is really pushing the Note 8 to its limits in noise reduction, because this is blurry and patchy and smeary. I mean, not that the Mate 10 photo is so pristine and clean. There's a lot of noise reduction going on there too, but it's a much nicer experience when you compare them side by side in terms of solutions. I do not find a huge benefit from zoom sensor phones. You need excellent lighting, and in excellent lighting, a crop of a photo from the normal sensor is probably going to look almost as good.
Mm-hmm. Wow. The Pixel 2 XL would have fared better on that, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Pixel 2 and the Pixel 2 XL both would have done better in this setup too, because it uses that main camera sensor. Mm-hmm. It's got a larger camera sensor with a faster aperture and better image processing. It absolutely would have done better in that test.
Indeed. If you want to see what the OnePlus 5T can do in terms of those respects, well, you're just gonna have to wait for our review. So
can't do a plug on my video.
Oh, yeah.
So embarrassing.
OnePlus 5T events.
I'd like to promote myself on your podcast.
I smashed my face against Joshua Vergara's.
Check it out at friedface.com, like fried chicken, but fried face.
Fried face.
Go to friedface.com.
Yeah.
I really feel like you're missing this huge opportunity to be more of like a character-y Batman villain. You know?
Who, me?
Oh no, it's Fried Face.
Oh,
Fried Face.
Oh no.
No, and before we finally kick off, where can people find you around the socials? Is the Fried Face the Twitters, or do you have your own?
Where can people find me? You can find me in my man cave. So it's my YouTube channel. To make it simple, just go to friedface.com. Links directly to my YouTube channel. For Twitter and Instagram, it's Wow Ryan with 2 O's. So that's WOOW Ryan.
That's how you spell wow.
Okay, woo Ryan.
WOOW. See, that's the problem I have, dude. That's the problem I have.
Okay, wow is WOW and wow.
I'm gonna call it. There you have it, folks. Another episode of the Pocketnow Weekly has come and gone. This show is over, but the conversation continues on Twitter, where you should definitely give Ryan a follow on his site, his YouTube, and his Twitter page. Jules is at Point Jules, and I'm humbly at Some Gadget Guy. Pocketnow is around the web on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, and our home site, pocketnow.com. For Spanish speakers, you got to go check out es.pocketnow.com. Shows like this cannot exist without your support. Sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology, and by dropping some reviews wherever podcast reviews can be left. Once again, we want to thank this week's sponsor, AppRiver, protecting your personal and business information. Definitely hit that link, appriver.com/weekly, to start off your 30-day free trial. But ultimately, there wouldn't be a show if it weren't for our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back with next week with all kinds of delicious technology goodness. So make sure you tune back in.
Happy shopping.
Extra
Black Friday.
crispy. Oh,
Oh, yeah.